Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are Anthony Valerio, Senior Associate/Project Manager, and Noah Bentley, Associate/Project Architect at Valerio Dewalt Train in Denver, Colorado, but also with offices in Chicago and San Francisco. Anthony's work balances passion with efficiency to meet his clients' needs while making space for creativity to thrive. As a senior associate and San Francisco site lead, he has served as the project architect for multiple tech campuses and the project manager on the Park and 17th Residential project. He was the project architect for the Rita Atkinson Residences, which earned a National Honor Award from SCUP, S-C-U-P, and a Design Honor Award from AIA's California Council and AIA Chicago. Noah approaches his projects headfirst and is always looking for the logic that makes all the pieces fit together. He believes there is a practical designed solution to every problem and an efficient technical workflow to get there. After my own heart, feel the same way. During his experience at VDT, Noah has worked closely with clients, consultants, and design teams to help deliver creative solutions for a wide range of projects, including multiple tech company offices in California and Colorado, Edison at Rhino Apartments, and Park 17 Apartments. The project we will be talking about today is, you guessed it, the Park 17 building, a mixed-use development in Denver, Colorado. Park 17 is an elegant 8-story development in Denver's City Park West, blending modern living with the city's vibrant urban fabric. This mixed-use building, designed by Valerio Dewalt Train and developed by Kairoi Residential, utilizes modular, prefabricated metal stud walls, part of a light gauge construction system, speeding up the building process without compromising design complexity. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guests today, super excited about this interview, by the way. My guests today are Anthony Valerio, Senior Associate and Project Manager on the project we're going to talk about today, and Noah Bentley, Associate Project Architect at Valerio Dewalt Train. Noah is in Denver. Anthony is in California, and they have offices in Denver, Chicago, and San Francisco. The project we are talking about today, which is a very cool project, is the Park 17 building, a mixed-use development in Denver, Colorado. By the way, I'm coming there one of these days for a concert at Red Rocks. It's on my bucket list. Somehow I'm getting there.
Bucket list.
Big bucket list. It's huge. Anthony and Noah, welcome to Detailed. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for
great.
having us.
I am excited about this conversation, about this building, and chatting with the two of you. We always start off every episode with some crazy icebreaker question that I pull out of the air for no rhyme or reason, or sometimes there's a reason. Today there's a reason. So I knew this was going to be a fun interview when I read your bios. I saw that Noah was into snowboarding, Anthony's into sports and good whiskey, and I'm like, I found my tribe. This is going to be fun. So since you both have an affinity for sports, whether it's participating or watching, tell me what your favorite sport is and why. What does it do for you? Why don't we start with you, Noah?
Well, you hinted at it for me. My favorite sport has and always will be snowboarding. I grew up snowboarding in Alaska. Met all of my friends growing up through snowboarding. I always enjoy the creative freedom that it gives you, right? It's it's a truly freeing experience, right? And it can take you all over the world. You can travel through it. You can continue to meet people, and everyone does it a little differently. So that's my favorite.
You might have to, after the show, tell me about this little story I heard from a little birdie. Can't imagine who that little birdie might be, about you hiking in college, hiking up the mountain with your snowboard on your back at like midnight with your buddies to snowboard down the mountain all the next day.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can get after it early, and it's pretty hard to beat. Like hiking at night is not great, but hiking at night with friends is fun, right? But it's pretty hard to beat a run, as the sun is coming up after working for it.
Can't say I've ever had that adventure, but it sounds amazing. How about you, Anthony?
My first love has always been basketball. I've always been a little bit more of a team sport guy. And I think the things I love about basketball is both like the sort of team element and the idea of being able to sort of seeing things develop at like before they actually happen, and that allowing you to sort of solve the defense. And then I also love the sort of statistical anomalies that allow I think college basketball's always been a draw for me, because there's that sort of David versus Goliath kind of element that different schemes and different sort of advantages allowed by the sport can allow those sort of those underdogs to actually take down the big guys, which is always fun.
Who's your favorite basketball team?
I'm a Milwaukee Bucks fan, born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And then I actually went to the University of Michigan. I've been a fan of them since I was a little kid, which probably sounds odd, me rooting for the Davids of the world, but then going to a university that's probably considered a blue blood in basketball and football. But I do still root for the little guy coming from a small market like Milwaukee.
I'm sorry. It's always, I mean, we just came off the Olympics. It's always fun to watch an underdog win, or somebody achieve something that they've worked so hard for. And somebody nobody expected to win the gold or to, win the championship. Personally, I'm a football girl, but there's probably very few sports I wouldn't go sit and watch if somebody gave me a ticket. It's a good way to spend a day.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's actually talk about this very cool building. First, let's just start with a broad general history on this project and what was the need.
Yeah, I could jump in there. So we had an existing client, Kairoi Residential, that we were actually under construction on our first project in Denver, in the Rhino neighborhood. And they brought to us this opportunity in a totally different neighborhood, the City Park West neighborhood, that was really sort of blowing up at the time. There was a strong need for housing because of the professional jobs that were in the neighborhood. It just had this great location along 17th that's sort of considered Restaurant Row. And so I think there was this need for a really strong developer, which Kairoi is sort of nationally known for bringing really high level sort of luxury living to all the markets that they're in. And that's really what this site was demanding and calling for, this corner lot on 17th, which is a really great sort of retail road, and then Park, which is this sort of diagonal thoroughfare through the city that really connects a lot of different areas, throughout Denver. So exciting. It was exciting when they brought it to us, and the site was being sold to them by some developers that really focused on commercial, and they really needed some of that expertise like Kairoi, and the expertise that BDT has on really taking full advantage of these urban infill sites.
So I loved the whole office worker / wine connoisseur and medical professional by day, foodie by night description of the people that you were intending to attract to this building. I was thinking, like, I want to go live there. Tell me about your design inspiration and how that user type influenced what you envisioned for this building.
Part of the the fun part about starting out a project is really identifying the neighborhood, identifying the demographic, everything that goes into the site analysis we truly put to use, right? And Kairoi also had, a desire right out of the gates to do a high contrast, their specific words, where I've always wanted to do a black and white building. Never made it work, right? But like, let's go there and try. And so we knew, we had worked with Kairoi before many times. We know that they're always trying to push the boundaries and try and bring something unique to a neighborhood. But then they, piled on the high contrast black and white thing. We had what we knew was a demographic that's rooted in its proximity to downtown and the professional workers there, but also a nearby hospital that has its own, workforce. And so, as Anthony said, the project was really demanding a luxury, elevated feel for it. And we just took the black and white high contrast pieces and ran with it.
I love that, by the way. I was like, oh, this is cool. I like things that pop. It is more noticeable. And there's so many mixed use, multifamily kind of buildings going up all over the country that just starts to feel like you're seeing the same building over and over again. And nobody wants that in architecture.
Yeah.
You want it. When you see it, whether you're an architect or not, when you see a building, you want it to make a statement. You want it to talk to you, or at least I do, but I'm a big marshmallow, so I don't look at things like a normal person. Let's get into some more let's start getting into some more specifics on this building. First, can you give me a broad description of the building itself, and what it includes within it? Just a broad description of the spaces and kind of the general aesthetic of the building.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So it's an 8-story residential mixed use building that parking always drives a residential project. You need to make sure you park enough cars there. So it's got one level of underground parking, but actually four levels of above ground parking that the residential building actually sort of wraps around. So part of the residential tower is 7 stories on top of the podium. The other portion is 4 stories on top of the podium. There's a 4th floor amenity deck that has a pool attached to a club room, a fitness room, and then balconies were really one of the sort of programmatic sort of must-haves that Kairoi wanted to make sure that we had as high of a percentage of the units having balconies as possible, because just inherently Denver is full of people that just love being, in a sophisticated building, but also love being outdoors. So we wanted to make sure that they had that immediate connection to the outdoors from their unit as much as possible. And then there's about 14,000 square feet of retail on the ground floor. That was driven by the fact that, I'd mentioned that the original building or the original property owners were actually commercial developers. They brought Kairoi in and sold the property to them to be the residential developer, but Kairoi actually then condoed the building into the residential portion and the retail portion, and sold the retail portion back to the original landowners. And so they actually managed, they managed the lease up and the filling of all the retail spaces on the ground floor.
I imagine that was pretty important if you're on Restaurant Row.
Absolutely, yeah. So we designed it and made sure that the infrastructure was able to support all of the retail spaces having restaurants or food service if they were able to actually sort of lease that up. And I think they've been relatively successful, which is great.
So from some of the things I was reading, and I'll own it. I always own it. I go troll you outside of the information you send me. Some of the things I was reading about this project is it sounds like you had to navigate various zoning ordinances and setbacks in addition to the city park view plane, which I'll let you describe what that is. Tell me a little bit about your journey with the authorities having jurisdiction to get to where you needed to go.
Yeah, the permitting journey in Denver is just that. It's a journey, we'll call it. But this project in particular had a lot of things that, from a zoning perspective, really set up, kind of what the building looks like, right? It's really truly the form is a function of the zoning restrictions. Denver doesn't do any kind of an FAR based code requirements or anything like that. They're really a form based code. And with that, there's upper story setbacks that they establish. There's normal lot line setbacks that we're all used to seeing. But then, the view planes are maybe not funny is not the right word, but they are here in Denver, we'll say. And they're set up as a means of preserving certain view corridors from certain places in the city to certain iconic things. This one is specifically a view plane to maintain a person standing in City Park can preserve their views of the mountains and preserve their views of the top of the Capitol building, which is, in the neighborhood adjacent to this. So there's a height that goes with that, but as you can imagine, the view plane starts, at a 5-foot person over here in the park and goes to some nebulous height, way away in the foothills, or the Front Range, right? And it's got a little bit of a slope to it, and it's sort of on the design teams to establish what that height is. But fortunately, we have good civil engineers that can help us do that. And it basically builds, a 3D plane, if you will, that is your height limit for your site.
And it's pretty interesting dealing with contractors who aren't used to being within that view plane, because the zoning code typically, every project has a height limit, right? But the zoning code typically says, oh, but this thing and that thing can still kind of go over that height limit, whether it be mechanical units, mechanical enclosures, elevator penthouses. But the city view plane is absolutely nothing can go above that. So we're working on the project. We know that we need to set a little bit of a buffer zone from that height limit. And all of a sudden we're reviewing our mechanical submittals, and there's this enormous exhaust fan that's being put on the roof that we're like, sorry guys, that doesn't work. And the contractor's coming back to us and saying, no, there's provisions that say we can go over the height limit, and you got to explain to them, sorry, like not in this instance. This is an absolute hard height limit. So that definitely an interesting process to work through that. And then, just like Noah said, with those upper story setbacks, the thing I love about the way that those sort of modulate the form of the building is when I look at that sort of massing from the corner of 17th and Park, it kind of makes me reminiscent of sort of a hillside town, almost those like views of Cinque Terre in Italy, where you see the sort of layering of buildings as they go up the hills, and I just think that that's super iconic for a project that is in a city that's always going to be associated with the mountains, right?
Interesting. I don't think I would have seen that had you not. I'm not reading emails over here. I'm looking over at the
Yeah.
pictures of the project
Uh-huh.
where we're talking about it, so I can see what you're talking about. And I would not have described it that way, but I can see exactly what you mean.
Now,
So did you get the permit the first time, or did you have to go back and forth with them a little bit before you got where
Oh
they
no.
wanted
yeah.
you?
Well, with the entitlements, it was a very long process because here's the other thing that we haven't even talked about. We had to vacate an alley that previously ran down the middle of this block. Which, when you look at the block, it's like, where would that alley go? Like, there was no use for that alley anymore. But there was a sanitary sewer running down that alley, and so to actually get the entitlements on the project, we had to reroute that sanitary sewer around the block, which when you submit for that, the entitlements on a process like that, you have to get a check mark from 27 different municipal departments, including private organizations like Denver Water, Comcast, the electrical, what's the electrical utility?
Excel.
Yeah, Excel Energy. And so we go through the process, and pretty much everyone said, yes, we support this. There's no reason for us to keep that alley. And then we got to the Parks Department, which Park Avenue has a bunch of pocket parks along it. And so the Parks Department has to, maintain those and keep those in good order. And they were one of the two departments in the municipality that said, we do not accept vacating this alley. That's where we park our trucks when we mow the lawn. And so we had to work that.
What'd you do? How did you get it to get everybody to sign off, or were you allowed to do it without those two signing off?
We very quickly no, you have to get sign off from everybody. So that's just the initial sort of round. And we actually learned from our civil engineers, they said Parks always says no. So and so what they ended up, the reason they ended up saying no was strictly because they wanted to have a conversation with us prior to approving the project. And I believe the concessions we had to give them was that we would put enough dog waste bag stations around our project, because dogs are very popular in Denver, and they just wanted to make sure that their park would stay relatively clean. I believe we had to paint a curb somewhere around the property that would be reserved for parks maintenance vehicles. So there were just some small concessions that they were requesting from us, and them clicking decline was strictly their way to start the conversation. We knew that, and we worked through it. We always know that working with municipalities is a process. It's a partnership. They're all just trying to make sure that their city, remains beautiful and functional, and you just have to find out what people want.
I live in Oregon, so a lot of the same kind of rules. And I did, I don't do as much of it these days, but I did a lot of years of public work. So everything dealt with all the agencies, because the projects themselves were public projects. And that is often the driver. It's not somebody trying to be difficult. They want to make sure they're having a conversation and keeping that momentum for keeping your city, your beautiful city, beautiful, and all the right people talking about it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the time, right? Those kind of comments can feel like a frustrating thing, but everybody's in it to win it, including the agencies, right?
Sometimes I've been on a couple projects where those comments ended up being very expensive comments.
They can be. Oh yeah.
You
They
need
can
to
be.
build a whole new street over here if you want to do this project.
Uh-huh.
One of the other comments we got from Parks that we were, I would just say, somewhat surprised about was that, we were working to design as welcoming and successful retail spaces, which we all know can be a real struggle, especially now after the pandemic. But even back then, it was a real consideration of how do we make these retail spaces as just like impressive and welcoming and memorable as we can. And so we actually brought up to the Parks Department, we would love to put a patio that faces out onto your park, onto your small pocket park, and sort of use that as a way for people to engage with your park. And they said, no, we don't want that. These are passive parks. They're meant for looking at, not for using. I was like, doesn't seem like the intent of a park, but okay, we'll go with it.
I gotta say, I've never met a park I wouldn't use.
Yeah.
But okay, whatever works.
Yeah.
Let's get into some project specifics. I like to just work my way from the outside in. So let's start with the site. What challenges, we've talked a little bit here about that already. What challenges, if any, did you face with this site? And how did this site influence the rather unique shape of this building?
Yeah, this site is unique in that it, is bound by Park Avenue and 17th, two very primary streets for people circulating through Denver, both vehicular and pedestrian traffic wise, right? But the side street on its east property line is also not a rear of the building in any way, right? So we really had a building that needed to face every side of itself like the front, right? It has no back side of it, if you will, which is a fun parameter to work for, right? It's fun when every side of the building needs to be presentable, if you will. But the building itself, right, to build on those streets is really at the intersection of two, formal grids in Denver. One of them is rotated 45 degrees from the other, and the result is, a little bit of a triangular site that gets a little bit of cuts out of it by the passive parks that Anthony was talking about. So, we had fun with the intersecting grids, playing with that through the organization of the whole project. The building is, proud against all of its property lines, but has a few rotations to essentially face the opposite grid, which we think brings a lot of attention to the corners. And, it really makes all the interior spaces face up the street properly, if you will, right? They all face the lot line, and nobody's facing the backside of anything, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. And that rotation is really something that the structural system of the building really wasn't set up to do. We used a proprietary cold form metal stud prefabricated system that's basically a series of steel posts that have prefabricated metal panel walls that get hung between them, and then the floor system is a series of 18-inch steel trusses, all made from the same sort of elements and members. And they had a really strict 2 foot by 2 foot grid that every structural wall had to land on. And so that was an interesting design process where we knew that we had to work within this 2 foot, every 2 foot cadence, which really set up some deep dive studies on how to maximize the unit count along each of those frontages. And then, but typically, and this company, which unfortunately is now defunct, but this company actually lamented that typically their buildings just sort of are an extrusion of whatever the ground floor, whatever the bottom floor plate is, and that our building was really the example that they wanted to show around the country, saying, look, our projects don't have to be these cereal boxes that are just extruded up. You can do things with rotating the grids, as long as you find sort of the optimal sort of transfer spot for sort of rotating those elements, and things still are able to the gravity loads are still able to travel down through the lower elements of the building. So it was really a fun design process. It gets all the way down to not just making sure the structure works, but making sure that your plumbing lines can route where they need to. So if they're going through some sort of singular transfer beam, that, they don't get hung up. So it was a lot of fun to work through that process. And Noah spent countless hours in coordination meetings with our MEP and structural engineers, just really dialing that in.
Have you recovered yet, Noah?
Yeah, I've had a breather.
I spent 6.5 years working in a large MEP firm. So, I'm looking at this building and listening to you talk about the MEP, and I'm like, I bet that was fun. The cool thing, though, about a building like this is the unique shape, all these extra requirements from the authorities having jurisdiction, forces you to get outside of the box in case you on occasion get stuck inside and so many buildings are just that cereal box or that square, and get creative. And I think that it keeps you learning and growing as a design professional, to have to solve those problems that you might not necessarily take on if you didn't have those things standing in the way of just putting another square box on the site. And that's only going to make you a better architect, right?
Yeah, we always say obstacles aren't obstacles; they're opportunities, right? Yeah, you try to, if you were able to, if you had all the space in the world, if you had all the money in the world, you could design a lot, but but having the obstacles and having to solve for those things is really, I think, where our creativity can sometimes be of the most value.
Well, how boring would this be if you were doing the same thing every time anyway? At least for me, I'd go insane if I didn't have challenges on a day. And as a spec writer, my life is nothing but challenges.
Yeah,
I would be bored to tears, and I would need to go find a different profession. So let's talk a little bit more about this modular load-bearing metal stud wall system that you used. Tell me about the structural design, and why you chose this system, because it sounds like you had some constraints using this system, and how the project benefited from the choice of using this system.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different systems like this now, but at the time, the system that we used was, as Anthony said, proprietary. They were local to Colorado. They're actually built in Arvada, right outside of Denver. And we were coming off of construction of another project that used the same system. That was actually the first project in Denver to get permitted with that system. So we had a few of the kinks figured out from the first project. And then moving into this one, right, we really took the parameters that they have as an opportunity, right, and push the boundary on our end. We push the boundary with them on their end, and ultimately produce something for them that they had never done before, that they could then take to any of their other projects with any of their other clients. And I think they had a lot of fun doing it, right? We had a lot of fun trying to help figure it out, right? But we we at VDT really pride ourselves in making sure we fully understand, right, the systems that we're using, so that we can then, find a way to break the rules a little bit.
Spoken like a true snowboarder, by the way.
I also think sometimes the decisions on what some of these really major systems you use is not only a factor of location, but also a factor of the time. At that point in time, as we were coming off finishing the Edison project and rolling into designing Park 17th, steel was just the more economic building element for mid-rise buildings over concrete or wood. CLT hadn't really taken off yet. And so it was a cost-effective material, but also it had proven on the Edison project that we were under construction on that it was fast. I think they do something like 11. They were doing 11 or 12,000 square feet of a floor plate in a per week, which was fantastic in terms of the speed with which we could top out on the building. There were still some learning curves. We didn't necessarily optimize sort of following the structure being built with some of the systems and finishes quite as closely as I think we ended up learning. We actually did a third Prescient project actually in Nashville. And that one, we were actually able to sort of more closely follow the structure going up with some of the finishes. But that those are some of the lessons you learn as you sort of work on things in a repetitive manner, and lessons we'll be able to take and help our contractors and other design partners understand as we move into working on other prefabricated systems.
Well, somebody has to be an innovator, right? And so nobody knows how that's all going to go the first time you're doing it, or or the second time, but it's in a different situation, a different building shape or whatever. But you learn that, and then that bleeds to everybody else. And labor costs, the faster we can do things, the better these days, because nothing's getting any cheaper, materials or labor.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your building enclosure. Now that I work for an enclosure consultant, I'm learning. I'm always learning something new. I'm learning more and more about enclosure systems in tight buildings and why certain materials are chosen for the facade or the enclosure of the building. So tell me about your enclosure design, what you did there, and some of the materials you used.
Yeah, that was a process. We went through a couple different iterations of what we were going to use, but because this is a high-rise building, there's a requirement, an NFPA requirement that there be a certain fire rating with your enclosure. But we also, wanted to go with that sort of taut metal panel look because of the sophistication we were going for on the project. And we found this product that had has special lateral wind clips that go with the attachment of the system that allowed it to be used on a high-rise building, even though this is more of a mid-rise project. And so that's how we selected that. And then for the actual full sort of enclosure, we were able to go through the value by design process that Excel Energy sponsors in Denver, and did extensive energy modeling on the project with a consultant called 14. And the project was able to sort of prove that it really hit a lot of the energy saving metrics by having a really efficient exterior wall system where it was the metal panel over continuous outboard insulation. And we were even able to eliminate the bad insulation within the stud cavity because that outboard insulation was so efficient.
Well, shameless, absolutely shameless shout out to my company. But just for your benefit, Noah, RDH Building Science just happened to open a new office in Denver.
Oh, yeah,
So
I'll have to connect.
if you're working on a project and you need the best building enclosure consultants on the planet, and trust me, I know it's my company and they pay me, but I don't say that unless I mean it about anything.
Yeah.
You got some of the best of our best are in the Denver office. So, you need help, just let me know. I'll get you straight to the top guy there, or girl.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
let us know.
Yeah. So I love the way that you hide the parking on this building. It, like you said earlier, these kinds of buildings, you have to have some parking. And when I first looked at the pictures, I'm like, where is it? And I had it not been for one picture you sent me that shows a car behind these slats, I could not figure out from the pictures that I have where you had the parking. And I love the way you did that, because parking is not necessarily an appealing looking thing, but it's important. Tell me about that design for the parking, because it looks good, and parking never looks good. Tell me about your motivation there and that design for the parking.
Yeah, I mean, the parking on every project is always a challenge, right? Especially on podium projects where it a lot of times is, functionally a little bit of a layer cake, right? It's often retail or some kind of ground floor program, parking, and then everything above. And I think there's always a desire on every project to find a way to blur those lines, right? Some are more successful than others, but on this project, I think we got lucky with the overall design strategy is really a play up of these interlocking blocks, right? Some of them rotate, some of them sit on top of each other, some of them stick out, right? But we were able to treat the parking as another block, right? That is a piece of the broader composition. And we had and tested a million different materials, color schemes on this thing to try and work with this black and white aesthetic that our client wanted. And ultimately, we all looked at it and thought, the kind of crisp edges that you get from a high contrast project like this really needed something to soften it up. And that's where some of this, slatted wall type language came from that you see on the balconies, right? But you also see it all across the parking. After redrawing that parking garage probably 30 times, right? We found something that we were happy with that we think fits pretty well.
Yeah.
What is the material? Let me ask that real quick.
Of
those slats, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at this Jeep in this picture. If that thing drives and hits that, because we all know some people can't drive. What is that material?
Well, there's always there's always vehicle restraint barriers between the parking and the slats. The material is just metal panel that has an application to it that makes it look like wood. But yeah, they're just metal panel. It's just a hollow metal panel tube that has the finish applied to it. And then, there's these cable stay vehicle restraint barriers that don't allow the band drivers to get to the slats.
Yeah.
But the other great thing about the slats and having that aesthetic that we started to bring in to, as Noah said, sort of soften some of those hard edges, was that it allowed the parking garages that were above grade to be naturally ventilated parking garages. So we did have to ventilate the basement, but that was it. That only required a small exhaust fan. But every other level of the parking garage, because of those open slats, is allowed to be a naturally ventilated garage. And that's actually part of the strategy with the cadence of the slats that are on the balconies as well, is that if your balcony is more than 50% enclosed on the sides, it becomes an enclosed balcony which then the Denver zoning code requires you to put those behind any setbacks. But if it's considered an open balcony, then the balcony can protrude into the setbacks. And so Noah absolutely dialed in the width of the slats and the openings between them and that perfect cadence. So it is 51% open, 49% enclosed. And that also eliminated the need to have fire sprinklers out on those balconies. So every bit of it was designed specifically not only to achieve that design aesthetic that we were going for, but also to save the client money.
That is genius. I'm listening to you and I'm like, oh, I would have never, ever, none of that would have crossed my mind. Look, I think that balconies look cool. They're cool looking balconies, but I would have never even thought that you could do something like that. Absolutely. Okay. So if that was your idea, Noah, tell whoever.
It's not just me. It's a team effort here.
Well, that
But
team needs a raise for that one. Your boss is going to be like, you can't talk to her anymore. No, that is absolutely
I'll make sure that
genius.
gets passed along. But the design of the balconies, or specifically the slats or battens, we always called them, was a pretty long process, right? And we went through many options, right? There's off the shelf systems that you can get that can do something similar to what we were able to provide here, but ultimately cost was the driver on all of it. And in conjunction with the contractor, we were able to come up with the system that is, as Anthony said, essentially a brake metal tube that wraps around an off-the-shelf metal stud that got painted, right? The things get riveted on the side, so it looks like a complete tube, but it is a very simply built piece of simple materials that, fortunately for us, could span the spans we need. It made it easy to, accommodate movement level to level and all the other things that need to happen for pieces like that. But we think it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, you can imagine the coordination and the detailing required to make each of those slats look straight, plumb, everything, while they go up in some cases 7 stories. Was a huge detailing effort, and something I think we're really proud of. And I think just the building looks super sharp with them in the end, and it creates some of those fantastic shadows with the high Denver sun that really adds to this sort of biophilic design that we wanted to lend to this building. Not only have it have that sophisticated look, but also just celebrate the climate, the environment that you're in such an amazing city like Denver.
I love them. I absolutely love them. I really do. I love them even more now that I know what you accomplished by designing them that way. But I would take a balcony like that if I lived, in a building like this over your traditional, balcony that you see in every building any day of the week. I love that you have the air coming in and light coming in the sides, but there's actually some protection, because it gets really hot and really cold in Denver, depending on the time.
A lot of times in the same day. Yep.
That's that right there is my cherry on the cake for this interview, and we're not even done yet. I love that. So before we go inside the building, describe for me a couple of the notable outdoor amenity spaces, because I love that pool deck as well. And whether you had any unique challenges in incorporating those outdoor amenity spaces into the design.
Yeah, I mean, the primary outdoor space is the pool deck. Off of that is where all the interior amenities really are located, right? So they all are, concentrated on that 4th level podium. And organizationally, right, we always knew that we had to put that pool in a spot where it got afternoon sun and had the view of the mountains, right? We're protecting all these view planes for people in City Park, a couple miles east of us, but these people that live here need to have that view also. So it's a unique opportunity, the location of the site and all that, to have a pool that has the views like this project does.
Yeah, and I think the other consideration was that not only did it need to sit on the concrete podium, but we really tightly slotted in the 4 levels of parking. So we have a pretty low floor-to-floor height on each of our parking levels. So we couldn't just drop this pool into the concrete deck. So we actually built up the deck 4 feet on top of the concrete parking deck. So when you actually are walking down the corridor in the on level 4 and you want to go to the pool deck, you turn down these 1 of 2 corridors to get to it, and you start ramping up. And then when you get out of the deck, you ramp up just a little bit more, and you're up on top of these pavers that are 4 feet above the actual finished floor level of the apartments on level 4. And what that did was it allowed us to have a 4.5 foot deep pool, which is like a great lap pool depth. It actually gave some privacy to the small balconies that some of the units actually have out on that 4th floor deck, because they're down at the actual floor level, whereas the pool deck is sort of up high. And and then it also created a safety element. Pools always have to have a lot of consideration for not allowing kids to somehow sort of navigate their way out there without, some sort of guardian. And that sort of differentiation and level allowed our club room to have a nice outdoor space that's on the 4th floor level, but gated and disconnected by that 4 foot difference from the pool. So it's safe for people to use the outdoors from the club room. And then the last thing we had to solve was our fitness room was like right up against this deck, and we didn't want that 4 foot level to come and sort of block the views from the fitness room. And so Noah actually had this great idea of creating a terrace planter that steps down to the floor level. And so when you're on like the elliptical machine facing out the windows, you're seeing all these tiered natural plantings in this planter, and then you also still get the views of the mountains. So all that sort of vertical navigation, we just took it as an opportunity to add in these interesting elements on that landscape pool deck.
That's a really, I would take a pool on a 4th floor over on the ground floor any day of the week, but I'm sure doing it on the ground floor would have been simpler. But that's a great way to solve that problem and keep that separation. And I especially love the way that you, by building it up like that, separate it from the people who have to live right next to it.
Yep.
So they're not, how many places have you seen where if you're the one with the unit right outside the pool, it's irritating?
Yeah.
I mean, people are having a good time, but I'm sure that this isn't probably a super huge little kids building, but people do have children, and kids can be loud, or well, sometimes adults can be loud. But that's it. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody do anything like that with a pool. I mean, how did you get the idea, or is it just something I haven't been exposed to?
Honestly, I hadn't been exposed to it either. We were just working through it. We knew that we couldn't lose the parking spaces below it, and so I just threw it out there one day, and it turned out to be a workable solution. Our structural engineer was on board, and we just worked through it. I mean, the other thing that was like really important to all of us was obviously this pool is sort of like right on the edge of the pool deck. So obviously you need to have the infinity edge and make it look like that water is just spilling over. And that was actually a struggle to get approved by the health department because they want a 4-foot strip around the entire pool to make sure that you can save people from any location. And so what we came up with was the pool still does the sort of infinity edge spillover, but we just put these individual 4-foot, what would you call them? Like almost pavers sticking out of the water along that edge, so that it was still a 4-foot walkway, but you could still sort of see that water spill over, which was, it was just a really fun design problem to work through.
I'd be out there all day. So let's go inside the building. Let's start with the ground floor commercial space areas that serve Restaurant Row, the lobby area of the building. Were these, I know one of the challenges when you're doing a ground floor commercial space design in any building like this is who's going to be in these spaces. And so what do we need to design? If you don't know who's going to be in them, how do we make the space as flexible as possible? You know, if it's a restaurant that comes in, or maybe it's a clothing store. So how did that all work? What did you do with these spaces? And did you know in advance who was moving in, or are spaces dedicated to a particular type of business? Tell me about the ground floor commercial design.
Yeah, flexibility was everything. Like I said, we didn't know who was going to be in those spaces because we were actually our client was actually selling the sort of condo of retail back to the original land seller, and so the land seller was really the one that defined what the spaces needed to be flexible enough to accommodate. And I would say the most important design consideration is because they said, hey, we want to make sure any of these spaces could be a restaurant, is shaft space.
It's exactly what I was thinking about too. It's like, just every one of these spaces have, space to put in like a hood. And
we literally put in 5 grease ducts, not connected to anything, in these 2 large shafts that we designed that go up through the building, so that if a restaurant ever goes into those spaces, they don't have to go in and install their own grease duct at a later date, which would totally be impossible because grease ducts have to be sort of welded at every seam and all that kind of stuff. So we just put them in. We just said, we'll go ahead and put them in, and they're in there. Even though I think one of the spaces is just I think it's a fitness space or a CrossFit space, but they've got grease duct in case they want to start cooking burgers one day. And we also put in a full grease trap plumbing system that all of the drains and all of the sanitary lines from those spaces goes through. So it's set up for the future, and it's set up for flexibility to be able to accommodate whatever anyone wants to put in there.
I've always wondered that. It's like, because we know that adds costs. Can add notable costs to the buildings. And sometimes developers don't want to do that. But then, over the course of the life of that, especially if they're flipping the building, but over the course of the life of that building, the more flexibility you have, that CrossFit might move out. And some really cool restaurant wants to move in, and you can do that. You're more likely to get that tenant. And,
absolutely.
And be able to move with the times and how the neighborhood changes. Interesting. Did you want to add anything about that space, Noah? The commercial space on the ground floor?
No, I think, we, like Anthony said, we stubbed, both grease ducts and grease interceptor lines through all that. I think regardless of the space that moves in, right, there's always flexibility around, where the, smaller plumbing systems and all that goes, right? So everything gets stubbed into the space. Electrical gets tapped into the back of the house, right? But, planning for the worst case scenario really preserves your building as you design it to stay looking the way you do it too, right? I think we've all seen the projects that maybe weren't intended to be restaurants, but ultimately someday end up being a restaurant. You see the big grease ducts sticking out the side of the building. So, for us, fortunately, that was something that was on the table from the get-go. So we were able to plan for it, and, hide it, because nobody really wants to see that stuff.
Nobody wants to see that stuff. So just give me some general, general description of, like what kind of units are they? All 1-bedroom units, or what that design looks like, and what kind of materials you used in the interior units to, give it the right vibe to fit in with what the rest of this building is.
Yeah, we've got studio units all the way planned up to really large 3-bedroom units, which is a little unique for the rental market, especially in this neighborhood. And all the units were designed, with the luxury market in mind. We worked pretty closely with the interior designer and Kairoi all together. There are 3 finish packages that get spread throughout the building, that all, as you stand in them, feel very unique. But they're color variations on similar materials from an efficiency for the contractor standpoint. But the projects are all LVT through the living spaces, carpet in the bedrooms. I think that's pretty standard for the rental market. And then in the bathrooms, it's all LVT on the floors with large format floor and wall tile in the showers. And lots of big windows to preserve the big views.
I love the big one. The one interior unit picture I have is I am surrounded by windows right now in my house, but the more light, the better, in my opinion. There are things you can do to, turn off that light when you want to, but having it all the time is great, especially because apartments can feel very closed in. I did my time when I was younger living in apartments, and they don't often feel like very expansive places. And just changing the windows can be a game changer for that, and going with bigger windows and not, more just standard size. So I love those.
Yeah, we work pretty closely. We as a firm try to advocate away from vinyl windows as much as we can, but we understand that that the marketplace has created some nicer versions of both vinyl and composite. And so I forget. No, did we end up going with Anderson 100 on this one?
No, we had those specified, but they ultimately ended up being a painted vinyl product.
It was a painted vinyl product, but we work pretty closely with the manufacturer to understand the sort of limitations on sizes, how we could mull some of the windows together to get some thinner mullion sizes, if there were windows to be installed together. And I think that really helped us not only with the sort of air and light requirements, but also there are some horizontal exhaust openings that need to be very closely coordinated with where your operable windows are, and working closely with that vinyl window manufacturer allowed us to get what I think is a little bit more an elevated aesthetic with the windows compared to what you're used to seeing with a vinyl window product.
What about the amenity spaces inside the building? I mean, typically these types of buildings have a number of them. I've got an interview coming up. It's the first time I ever saw a project description that said they designed a teen room, a room for teenagers. I'm like, hopefully it has a lock. I'm joking. Rubber walls or, padded walls. What amenity spaces did you have to incorporate into this building so that the users of this building have what they need?
You know, there's a fitness center, and there's, a club room, which has a kitchen space, a really large TV watching type space. There's some dining space in there for folks that want to use the kitchen and have, a get together. And then I think there's a wall game that the interior designers put in that I think is like, oversized chess that's magnetic to the wall, which is kind of cool to look at and play, right? But interior designers had fun with this one. They really played up the high contrast finishes. Also, I think at some point they were joking that the building had a spirit animal that was a zebra, and so there's a few pictures of zebras that show up here and there. But
I don't think they were joking at all.
But the high contrast colors from the outside certainly found their way inside. I think Kairoi is always an advocate of really elevating the feel of the interior spaces and their amenities, and they did just that here.
So it sounds like fun. It sounds like interiors people too. So I know, especially on this side of the country, we're all trying to design, just as part of daily practice, more sustainable buildings. It's not such a unique conversation anymore, especially on the west side of the country. It's just a part of daily practice. Were there any specific or notable or unique sustainability efforts made on this project that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we went through a pretty extensive energy modeling process to ensure that we not only achieved sort of code minimums of energy efficiency, but this elevated, I think it was a 25% improvement upon code minimums for the value by design process or program that Excel Energy sponsors. So we were able to achieve that. We also ensured that, the plumbing fixtures were, met all of the requirements of LEED, even though we weren't going for an accreditation. Those things that I think any decision we could make that, it is a developer-led project, so the cost was a factor. So any sustainable decision we could make that really followed the practices of LEED accreditation that didn't add cost to the project, which I think there's quite a bit now that's just been sort of amortized by the market and is allowing it to be sort of part of our base design. We make those decisions for all of our projects, including this one.
I love to talk about lessons learned. It's like my favorite part of every interview. What went wrong or what was hard and what did you learn from it kind of conversations. And we all face challenges on every project. Tell me I'd like each of you to answer from your own perspective. Tell me about one difficult, we're talking design here, not construction yet. We'll get into that fun in a minute. One difficult design challenge you faced, that was new to you or challenging, how you navigated or solved it or what you learned from it. Who wants to
go first?
Why don't you go, Noah?
I really enjoyed the back and forth with the structural engineer, specifically the structural engineer, the proprietary system, right? So that we, as a team, really dug in, understood everything that we could do, and then we really, pushed the boundaries of what their system was capable of, or what they thought it was capable of. we were able to take this product that Anthony described earlier that was envisioned as something that's built for these kind of perfect extrusions, right? And when you rotate something mid-story, you know, on the fourth level of an 8-story building, structurally that never is a simple move, but you know, after lots of careful coordination as a team, right, we were able to do it with all of their standard pieces. And so that's something that I think was a really fun challenge for the project, and certainly a challenge for them. But I think it resulted in a really positive outcome.
Did that change the way that you looked at the next building design you did, or changed the way that you looked at problem solving in general as you took on your projects that you did after this one?
I think so. You know, I think we learned a lot about what the interface of all that rotation looks like, right? And what that means for everything, right? Everything in a building wants to stack, right? That's the simplest way to do things, and that's why it's done, right? But, you know, when you do want to break the rules a little bit, knowing how to plan for some of those things early on in the process, right? So that your plumbing stacks don't move, right? Your units might move entirely, but find a path for everything to be continuous and be built like everybody's used to doing it. Is certainly something that we learned along that path, right? It's not something we'd never done before, but we learned a lot. I learned a lot, and use it every day, right, in coordination now on current projects.
Well, yeah, and the next time you want to break the rules, it'll be easier and more efficient. It's not that you can't. I tell people that all the time. They think that, you know, spec writers are just so rigid and you can only do things one way. That is not remotely true. I break the rules every single day. It's knowing how to break the rules so you don't create risk or you don't create a problem, how to do it effective and efficiently. So I love that answer. How about you, Anthony?
Mine is sort of along the same lines, but with the enclosure system instead of the structural system, really finding ways to really use the same material, that field assembled metal panel system to achieve every small detail throughout the building. I mean, it ended up being incredible that we had a single sub do every square inch of the enclosure because they were not only the metal panel system, but they were the roofing company also. And we didn't use it. We used a TPO system, but they just had the ability to do that as well. But making that metal panel work for the bronze metal panel, the white metal panel, the larger slats at the garage, the frame of the garage, the metal slat, the metal battens at the balconies. I think that sort of design challenge and detailing challenge of getting that same material for the same sub to be able to do every square inch of that exterior enclosure was a really, really fun design challenge, but it was definitely a challenge.
Well, one of the biggest issues on projects are intersections between the work of two different subs. And when you can have one do all of those same things, you get a consistency in the work and you have much less concern about those places where things meet because they're handling both of those things. So I imagine that made the whole project more efficient as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about construction. People try, construction went fine. You are lying to me if you say that, because there has never been, in my over 30 years of experience, a construction phase that didn't have a challenge. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. I don't even like that word in our business because there's challenges in everything we do, or surprises that come up. You know, I didn't know that was going to be there when you rip open a wall. How did the construction phase of this project go? And tell me one good story.
Yeah, I mean, all construction right? The end product is always great, right? But construction is a messy process, both, in every sense of the word. But I think I'm going to pull one story out. It's maybe not a story, but a particular challenge, right?
Okay.
That, this project, being that it had streets on all sides, and then most notably the pocket parks, right, or the passive parks, those parks had to remain open during all of the construction. And so, there's a lot of coordination on the contractor side about access and how they did all this, right? Lots of arms swinging way around and over parks, right? So that the parks could remain open. And, there's not uncommon to find people sleeping in the trees under the parks during construction. But, when it came time to open, right, or, get our CO, parks came back out and made sure their parks were all perfect and clean, right? And we had to do a little bit of extra work. Well, the contractor had to do a little bit of extra work at the end to make sure their parks were still great and passive.
The parks they don't want anybody in. Don't affect the parks we don't want you in. Just
they
they gotta
really
look
ended
pretty.
up being they really ended up being an amenity to the project, right? It's pretty cool to have a project in an urban center like this that's bordered by parks on 4 or 5 sides. It's cool.
Anything you want to share during construction, Anthony?
Well, mine actually. So Noah lived and breathed this, like literally almost like lived on site during construction. Right. I'm in California, so I would just fly in every once in a while. So mine is really more of this was a really collaborative process with the contractor very early on. And one thing that did come up as we were about to start construction is that we ended up really learning that, when you look at a project schedule, and then this is something that before this project, I didn't really understand this sort of rule of thumb. But the idea that when you look at the project schedule, if you don't have a lot of overlapping trades, you should expect the superstructure of the project to be about the first third of the schedule. And before we started, the contractor actually had a schedule where they were saying superstructure is this length, and that was half the schedule. And so what we ended up having to do early on in the project, I think even before we started construction, was we had to ask them and work with them to rework that schedule to make it more realistic. And it did extend the time of construction, but that was early on, and that was just something that some of the more experienced person were able to identify as a challenge. That's really important because that not only changes the delivery date for your client, which changes how successful it is, changes how much time we're spending in construction administration. It changes how much time the contractor has to be on site with their staff, their rentals, with everything. And so really being a partner with your contractor to identify some of those potential challenges early on, based on some of those rules of thumb, is really important for us as architects to stay diligent on as well.
And that's good advice because, contractually, the contractor schedules the work. But like you said, it's certain kinds of buildings. I did schools for a number of years. You cannot have a school open late because those
Yeah,
kids don't have anywhere to go on that, day after Labor Day in Oregon or whenever they go back to school. And it affects all of those things, including everybody's profitability. And CA typically for architects is the time you get the least amount of money from your project over the longest period of time. So you can't afford to lose time there if you want to have a profitable project.
exactly.
And so the earlier you make a decision on any project, the less cost impact you're going to have for making a change if you need to make one. The later you make those changes, the more it's going to cost you. So it's really great advice because A lot of people think it's up to the contractor to schedule it, and it is contractually, but that doesn't mean we can't be a part of the conversation on behalf of our clients and make sure we've got everybody on the same page and look for ways we can solve things and not, maybe there are some things that could overlap to shorten that time. So definitely a great conversation to have. If you had to pick one thing, each of you, about this building that's your favorite, what would be your choice? Noah?
My favorite, working on these multifamily projects, especially during CA, right? You always learn that you have a favorite unit, right? But my favorite part is really a function of those upper story setbacks, right? Where we were able to provide really large exterior terraces that are private to some of the units that abut them, right? And so some of the units on level 6 that have really primo views of downtown also have, a 800, some of them might be as large as 1,000 square foot exterior terrace, right? That they can use space for. And didn't go into the project thinking that those would be our favorite units or my favorite units, right? But they're very special, and I think they're very unique to the rental market, to have a big, essentially outdoor yard up at level 6, right?
I didn't realize that until you just said it just now. I'm over here going, wait, where? That is unique and special, and anybody who is living apartment living would kill to have something like that. Have, more than just your little balcony outdoor space that you could go out and, do whatever you're going to do. Anthony, how about you?
Mine is more on the personal people level, but right as we were finishing design on the project and our construction documents, Noah's now wife was getting an opportunity to go to Denver. And that meant Noah was obviously going to follow her. And because Noah and I had been living and breathing this project, it was the absolute perfect moment for us to keep Noah on and have him help start our Denver office. And the idea that there was just that fortuitous timing that we were working on this project in Denver, he was moving to Denver, and we got to continue, working together and he got the opportunity to help start that office. I just, that'll always be one of the best things for me out of this project was getting to keep working with Noah.
Way to level up, dude.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's like, okay, I'll just create my own opportunity. I love that. I love stories like that. Before we get into our 2 closing questions, tell me, what can I expect to see down the road from VDT? What are you working on now that I'll be calling you about later saying, hey, come back on the show?
We got lots of fun stuff in the works, both in Denver, like Park 17, but also across the country. I know for me, I'm really excited about a new project in the low-high neighborhood here in Denver that we're working on, also multifamily. That thing's just getting started, and I'm excited about everything about it. And we've got another project in Phoenix that I'm really excited about, a high-rise with a different client that we're hoping goes under construction, next quarter of this year. Hopefully the stars align there, but I think we can expect to see more fun design coming out of our office, I hope.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to share, Anthony? Any other?
I think Noah covered the exciting stuff we got going on. I mean, that's one sort of interesting thing about our office is that even though we sit in different locales, we obviously also have the Chicago office. We really act as one firm that just happens to sit under 3 different roofs. So everything Noah said is the stuff that we're really excited about across the firm.
It's honestly one of the, I mean, I work from home. I write specs for 10 offices. I'm the only spec writer at RDH for 10 offices, over 300 people. I'm far more efficient from home. And so for me, it's all one office. I mean, I might be doing something different in Vancouver, BC than I'm doing in Oakland, California, but it's all one office for me. And technology has really given us that flexibility to follow your wife to Denver and, hey, let's open a new office while we're here. And or for me to be able to write specs in 2 different countries for a bunch of different offices. And I think that, there's definitely an argument, especially for younger professionals that are growing and learning, to be in the same space at sometimes. But I think that flexibility, my personal opinion, is improving our industry, not taking away from it.
Absolutely.
I know not everybody sees it that way. So we always close with 2 closing questions. One's a more broad industry question, just like the icebreaker. I make it up. I read some stuff and I'm just like, what do I want to ask these 2 guys? And then our final question. So, Anthony, a sentence in your bio jumped off the page for me. And that sentence was, quote, Anthony's work balances passion with efficiency to meet his clients' needs while making space for creativity to thrive. I typically, I've been working mainly in architecture for a long time, and I typically hear architects talking far more about creativity than I hear them talking about efficiency. Rightfully so, but we do have to be efficient and we have to be profitable. And I'm an efficiency freak. I'm total polar opposite. I don't have a creative brain in my body, but I'm not an architect either. Thank goodness. Nobody wants me to design anything. But I do think efficiency is an area we can improve on in architecture. And I believe if we were more efficient with some of the things we have to do that nobody really wants to, you would have more time for that creativity that you went to school to have and do in this business. I do a lot of teaching in the project delivery, contracts, specifications area. And architect after architect tells me, they didn't tell us in school we had to do all this stuff. I want to design buildings. I don't want to push RFIs and change orders and review specs and that kind of thing. So for both of you, tell me how you think architecture firms can improve their efficiency without sacrificing their creativity.
Yeah, I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day, right? Yeah. And I think as we've all learned as we work through the industry, and I had a little bit of front end knowledge that there's a lot more to being an architect than drawing pretty pictures, just with my dad being an architect. But I just know that there's a lot we have to do, but we all love being creative. So we better be as efficient and precise as possible with those things that are part of our responsibilities, so we can make room for that creativity. But that creativity comes in a lot of forms, whether it be actually designing a project or thinking differently about how to use materials, thinking differently about how to communicate with our colleagues to ensure that no piece of information falls through the cracks. So those are just the elements of technology that I'm always trying to find an option, a way to like connect those dots in the most straightforward manner to then leave room for, let me sit down and think about, what this building is going to look like.
How about you, Noah? How do you think we could be more efficient?
Oh, that's $1 million question.
I know it is.
But, I think there's all kinds of technology that is always changing, right? I'm like looking at my other screen at Bluebeam, right? And think about all the advantages that program brought it, as we got there. But I also know that, architects and people in general, right? Not just architects, regardless of what we're doing, are creative beings, right? And we all are searching for a way to be creative no matter what we're doing. And I don't think that mindset will ever go away, even as the push for efficiency becomes more and more and more important, which it always will, right? So I don't know. I wish I knew the crystal ball answer on what we could do to be more efficient, but I do know that I don't think anybody's willing to quite give up living in a creative world at this point.
Well, because efficiency is my superpower, I'm always looking for a way to, for example, I collaborate on all my specs with all my teams in all these offices in Bluebeam, and everybody on that project is invited to that Bluebeam session. And we no longer have, like back in the day, this person over here with this document, this person over here with this document, and they're not talking to each other or knowing what they're not knowing what the other's contributing to that specification. So then they would come back to me and I'd have conflicts, and now I have to have 20 phone conversations and meetings to try, what do you want to do here? Because you said this and you said this. Now we all do it in one place. I would say from where I was earlier in my career and how long it took me to do specs as opposed to how long it takes me now is probably 70 or 80% less time. Just based on having a place where we're all on the same page, everybody sees what everybody's doing. The drafters can contribute as well. And there's, like you said, not leaving out an important piece of information. If the whole team's looking at that information in one place, we've solved a ton of problems there. I love finding stuff like that. Well, guess what? They get to spend a lot more time on their drawings because they don't have to spend that kind of time on that piece. I just need to know what you're doing on your project. Then you can go away. I can write the spec. I just don't know what you're choosing. And it's been a game changer in my last 4 offices, the process I use in making that more efficient to free up all of these design professionals to do their thing. So I love finding those kinds of things. I could have 20 sessions on efficiency, but
we literally have like the ultimate lunch and learns about like, here's a way to be more efficient in this program. But one of my favorite is that we're sort of a Google-based organization, so we don't really use Microsoft suite of projects as much anymore. We're constantly in Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides. And I think my favorite is in using Google Slides for our presentations. We no longer are like saying, okay, the night before we have to wrap up the editing of this presentation so that the team can take it on a thumb drive to the client's office and get it It's like, no, our marketing team is working on that presentation, making small edits right up until we hit present on that slideshow in that conference room. And there's nothing like, just knowing you have that time to like make things just right when you're about to present your work, which is really important to you. If people spent years, putting their blood, sweat, and tears into it, you want to make sure that you're presenting yourselves really well. And those types of cloud-based collaboration softwares are just changing the game.
Final question. Everybody gets this. Every guest, easiest question of the day. That was sarcasm. So we all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. I know I do. All kinds of ways you can do that. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
Being a good father. Like, I love being an architect. I love my day job, but I love being a dad the most. So all I want to know is that, just like we were talking before we got on here, is making sure I listen to all the advice that I'm given to be a great parent, and putting that into practice, and knowing when I make a mistake, I just got to come back the next day and do better.
Noah?
I hope I have some kind of a legacy of finding a way to make generally things that might be unfun fun in some way, and I'm a firm believer in, no matter where you go, whether it's a campsite or, a bus stop bench, but, leave wherever you're at a better place than how you found it. So I hope that helps in some way.
You find your tribe. Both of your answers are like, oh my God, like we need to be best friends. I do a little experiment. I've been doing it for years. Whenever I go to a new city and I'm walking down the street, I smile at people, seeing how many I can get to smile back. I know it's stupid and it's a challenge. I'll tell you, New York is a challenging city. But you watch a person's face change. And I know people have done it to me, and it has changed the time that happens after that going forward. And I mean, we all do all kinds of things, but it's just, and I've even had some people just like stop dead in their tracks and turn around and say, thank you for that. That's really, it's only happened a couple of times, but it's mind blowing. I do think the tiniest things we do can leave impacts just as great that we may never know as, the more notable things we do. So, gentlemen, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to both of you today. When I get around to my Red Rocks concert, Noah, I'm going to be calling you and saying, hey, you want to show me that building since I'm in town? And I wish you luck with setting up the new gig in Denver. And I hope you'll come back and talk to me again.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Cherise.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. And let us know when you're in Denver or San Francisco or Chicago.
I find myself in Chicago and San Francisco on occasion. I still have yet to ever set foot in Colorado, so that's high on my list. So it might be sooner than...
Well, you probably flew over it on your way to one of those places.
I think
next time you make a pit stop, let us know.
I think I've actually had layovers in Denver before.
Yeah.
But
the Denver airport isn't Denver.
No, I know. That's why I don't count it on my cities I visited list. But no, truly, this was I loved every bit of this interview, and I'd love to have you guys back anytime.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.